hosting, right?
I'm hosting.
You're hosting?
Oh, cool. Yeah.
That way we can go live.
No, but I mean for the show.
No, no, Casey is.
Yeah, cool.
For the
For
dual
all
host.
hosts.
All right.
You're live.
All right. Thanks everyone for being here, taking time out of your busy schedule to talk about things that matter. I feel like it would be silly not to do things like this right now, like given we all have free time and uh, yeah, we need to regain our relationships with plants. And yeah, Bridget, I have a question for you. Could redefining the way in which we relate to nature unlock the abundance we're so desperately searching for?
Well, one thing that I'm very committed to teaching people about is that most of the things that people think are weeds are actually edible plants. And I learned many years ago, I lived for 2.5 years just on wild edible plants living in the Ozarks. I lived in a teepee. That was something, we got to get back to the land. But when I learned that most of the things that were coming up in the garden that people thought were weeds were the ancestors of our cultivated vegetables, that changed my life. Like you could have 2 to 3 times the yield in your garden. And, right now we're going to have to really learn how to respect water more because we are using 1/3 of our nation's water to water grass, which is a crop that people don't eat unless you're a goat or a cow. It's kind of silly. That's not thinking futuristically. Maybe that was cool to do in the 1880s, which actually is when that tradition got started by the British aristocracy. But one other thing is, I think we're all looking at our planet's a mess. Hungry times are coming for a lot of people. A lot of food crops have been, demolished in some way or another. But when we learn to eat the weeds, they are genetically superior because they grow without being planted. They grow without being watered or weeded. They survive adversity. And if we want to do something great to strengthen our immune systems, learn to eat the dandelions, learn to eat the malva, the chickweed, the violet leaves. They are Jedi survival plants, and I feel that they hold a key to helping us adapt to adversity. So there.
Sold. Give me some weeds, man.
Eat some weeds, smoke some weed, eat some weed.
And I'd love to chime in on that because in my program, Your Wake Up Call yesterday, I actually spoke with Lori Schneider. And if you know Lori Schneider, Trevor, you may, she's local here. And that's exactly what we spoke about was food is our medicine. And we're discovering the essence of, wild, natural, native medicinal plants, and dandelion comes up, horsetail comes up, Japanese knotweed, all of these things that you mentioned, Bridget, are really, powerful, you know, plant foods. And we spend too much time in this colonial world. If we took all these beautiful lawns outside my door here in a square block, you got enough, you can feed the block. If people grew food instead of grass.
Absolutely, and we could save thousands of dollars. Rather than growing grass, we could be growing things that provide fodder for the pollinators. Save money, drive less rather than going to the health food store and buying, kale or lettuce that's imported from another state or country. I mean, the life force you get from eating something so fresh that it was growing 5 minutes ago, you can't get that at the store.
Absolutely. And one thing I can say is in these really interesting times, one of the biggest booms in, business and what's going on out there is gardening and growing your own vegetables. And we fell into that at our home here in Vancouver where, we finally got our vegetable garden in, and it's so great to just be able to go out and graze in your backyard. You got berries, leafy greens, and there's something about it that you don't even need to eat as much because it's so much more fulfilling. You're picking it right there and eating it. There's just nothing like it.
Yeah, then you can go like full. I'm in East Van here, and there's some yards that have basically been co-opted by this company that will come in, will do all the growing for you. It's taking your yard, turning it into it looks like a totally like a a mini agriculture plot in the middle of the suburbs, and then they will come and harvest it. They'll take care of it. Then you get a share of the food that's done. Like, more of that sounds awesome, and it's way cooler to look at than just a boring old lawn.
Well, yeah, it's such a such a brilliant idea. Actually, I think it. For those who don't know, and for those who are learning, it's a great way to get started. And yeah, you talk about lawns and the opportunity. My grandfather, he was Dutch, and he one of the things as I got to know him in the later years, shared that his parents always told him, always make sure you have a home that has a yard where you can grow your own food, because nature is the best medicine. And I had met in my previous retail career, I'd met a geneticist from UBC, and we were talking just about plant-based diets and things. And she was saying that some of the best pharmaceuticals will give you 80, maybe 90 genetic expressions, where food and nature and plants, like the natural stuff, will give you over 300, 350 different genetic expressions, because it's nature that's triggering nature, not something that's been processed and synthesized from nature to kind of give you the one specific thing that they want. To me, it was just really opened my eyes.
It feels like a lot of our issues come from just not being connected to ourselves. Like, so much of our food is like the life force is sucked right out of it. But it's like you say, Brigitte, if we could learn to know what is in our backyard and teach our children that, and explain to them how magical it is and how we should be cautious, but we shouldn't be afraid of nature. Because I know when I was in school, it was like, be afraid of what you don't know. There's poisonous things out there, but what about all of the beneficial things that are out there too? We can't be afraid of the unknown all the time.
And it's easy to learn what the few, poison hemlock, poison ivy, learn the poisonous plants, and, have a good guidebook. There's a lot of phone apps. So it's a way of taking more responsibility for our health, because we've been really cut off. And, I know as a child, the first time I saw tomato growing, I was kind of amazed, like, wow, they don't come from a factory. I assumed everything was made in a factory, but my grandmother grew tomatoes, and that really opened my eyes. And, another thing that we might think about is how much water we waste. We use so much water, just letting it go down the drain, going down the drain. And what if everybody, used really biodegradable products or a few drops of essential oil, and they had a basin in their sink, and all the water from, rinsing a dish or rinsing an apple from the store, they took that water and they opened the door and they gave it back to the earth, and they were watering the mint plant or the raspberry bush. So a proverb I heard as a youth that is always with me is, if we have water to throw away, throw it on a plant. Because, we know that there's so many people on the planet, and using water as if there's an infinite amounts, that's been very disrespectful. And we use as much in one flush of the toilet that a person in another country might use all day long for food and washing and bathing. And so respecting water is a great place to start. And, don't just pour it down the sink. You can give your bath water to the plants on the balcony. And yeah.
Could you tell, not to digress, but the fact that you mentioned that you lived for 2 years in the Ozarks in a teepee, if I could get a tiny bit of backstory on that, my curiosity might last for the rest of the hour.
Okay, well, back in the 60s, I'm a senior citizen, but back in the 60s, the idea that we are going to live more communally, we're going to put our resources together, buy land, grow food. It was also a place where we were growing cannabis, which was, very illegal back then. And so we bought land in the Ozarks. And it's interesting right now, when we are looking at the crisis of our world right now. I was talking with a client yesterday. It seems like doing what we were doing 50 years ago is probably a good thing to get back to, putting our resources together, building eco homes, growing our own food, using herbal medicine, meditation, sacred use of psychoactives, yoga, meditation, taking responsibility for our health. And so it was a great experience. And I'm glad that that farm is still there. But I see right now that a lot of people are thinking about, wow, we need to get out of the craziness of the city. We need to learn what to eat. We can't count on the grocery stores. We can't really count on all the things that were taken for granted. So it's time to wake up and live more sustainably. And does really everybody need to have their own, TV, washing machine? Like, couldn't we share some of those things, and put our resources together? So, I sometimes joke and say, the hippies were right all along
Well,
about a lot of things.
there was certainly a simplicity and a more naturalness to that movement than, the colonialistic, concrete jungle that disconnects us from nature. It's been my experience, when we disconnect from nature, we disconnect from ourselves, we disconnect from source in a different way. We don't walk bare feet on the ground, we don't hug a tree, we're not eating anything that's actually, natural. It's all industrial produced, genetically engineered for mass production and mass profits. Right.
I'm all about that middle road these days with the
Mhm.
Buddha sitting behind me right now. Just that, how do we take everything that you just talked about, Brigitte, and then how do we take all the insights that we gained from monoculture even? How do we bring that all together and make this incredibly efficient way of living in the middle? I think we're getting there. I think that's what this time in the world feels like.
For so long. Like,
Yeah.
And even if it isn't like, moving out to the country and buying land, like, what can you do? Most of us, if we have a front yard, a backyard, could we be planting fruit trees? I'm really big on guerrilla gardening. I not only plant fruit trees in my yard, but I'm like a pirate. I go out at 5 in the morning with a shovel, and I'll put a peach tree across the street or down the block.
Right on.
And wouldn't it be wonderful if there's just like, plums falling to the ground and no one was hungry, rather than only thinking about my, me. I mean, we are providing flowers for, our bees, and our bees provide, they pollinate 3 out of every 4 bites of food we eat. So when we have a manicured lawn, there's nothing for them to collect pollen from. Even if you do grow grass, growing white clover would be one way that you could still give flowers and pollination possibilities. So we can start with our own yard.
I had this, I'm in this business of giving ibogaine to people, and I used to rent a 6,500 square foot mansion on a couple of acres. And one of the first things I had to buy, I negotiated a deal because the lawn was so big. I'm like, I'm gonna have to buy a riding lawnmower here. So I bought a riding lawnmower, and there was one particular patch that I just let grow wild while I was there. And all these flowers came up, all this life came up. And then unfortunately I had to mow it when I gave it back to the landlord. But as I did so, like, so much life came scurrying from out of this little tiny patch where I just said, I'm not gonna mow this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, but would have been apocalyptic to those little moles inside of there.
Well, it's funny because, you've been to our home, Trevor, and we had a movement here, no mow May, for the bees. So when I heard about that, I didn't mow in May, and we quite loved it. So June 1st came, and that conditioned colonialism was in me. It's like, okay, let's mow the lawn. So I mowed the lawn. Well, it's the end of June, and I haven't mowed the lawn since. And it's out there, the clover's there, the grass is growing to seed, the buttercups, the bees, we're seeing it all happen. And, that's what we're talking about now. Now we're going to kind of carve in a design and maybe some crop circles or something, and have some fun with it. But we just thought in our home, as a community home and, conscious living that way, we want to make sure that we take care of things as much as we can and kind of break these patterns of, the colonialistic ways of doing things and really honoring nature.
Not to mention that lawnmowers are noisy. They use gasoline. You got to use gas to go get gas. And so if we, just take care of like a small patch, even if it's our porch or our balcony or our front lawn. I love that you're doing that. We just made a little video called Lawn Gone. and our producer had a little tagline: "If you're mowing it, you're blowing it."
I
It's
love
really,
it.
it feels anti-life to be mowing your lawn now that I'm thinking about it. Like that, when I think of that little patch that I didn't mow, like give life an opportunity, it will take it and flourish.
Yeah.
But this lawnmower, no. Even the grass itself, we're gonna kill you a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
Let me kill you a little bit every couple of weeks to keep you pretty. Ugh.
Well, and I think it's interesting because it says something about our culture that everything needs to be perfect and square and trim and neat, and then that's what your neighbor does, and it creates this, this kind of world we're living where everything is, perfect, yet nature's perfect.
And it
Now,
does feel great to lay in a piece of lawn. Like
oh
we've
yeah,
got a beautiful park down the road, and I go lay in there every day.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's about that road. Anyway, Casey, we've hijacked your show from you.
No, that's awesome. I like what you said about the middle road too, because obviously traditional practices are really important, and a lot of our society's been based on it. But innovation's important too. But we can't really combine them because they're different things, and they work well because they're different. But is there a way that we could have them working in the same space and respect nature? And
I heard an awesome quote. I heard a really awesome quote from I don't know where I read it. It was somebody walked into this beautiful garden, and the whoever was walked in for the first time is like, "Oh my God, this beautiful garden. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for producing this beautiful, beautiful garden." And then the gardener standing next to him, and he's like, you should have seen what God was doing with it before I got here. So I think that emphasizes the middle road. I think it's there. Like we are the caretakers. That the Bible talks about. It called us dominion. We were given dominion over the earth. I don't like that word. It sounds like dominance. But how about we're the caretakers? We're the custodians. We were given custodianship of the earth. I think, I think we are God's tools to tend the garden that He's given to us.
So there's also, speaking about the middle road, there are things that people could plant in their yard so it does still provide a nice place to lay down, like thyme or white clover or pennyroyal or chamomile, chickweed, violets, which could produce salad all year long. I do have an article online. It was in Huffington Post. It's called "Get Off Your Grass and Create an Edible Lawn." So you can have that kind of lawn that looks, polished enough, but yet there's things that are natural and alive and vital and edible. And, dandelions have become sort of like public enemy number one. And unfortunately, we need to realize that the dandelions actually aerate the soil. So having dandelions in your yard means that more nutrients are going to be available for the other plants, and every part of that plant is edible. It was one of the original bitter herbs of Passover, but the leaves are edible. You can even boil the stems like noodles in hot water and then saute them with garlic and olive oil. Like,
Wow.
Noodles don't really taste like anything, but dandelion stems, you put a sauce on that or some, pesto, you've got lunch.
I'm going to suffer some karma for the mass destruction of dandelions that I've committed in my life. While I owned that lawn, actually.
Well, I think we've all been there, and this is something that Laurie Schneider brought up yesterday when we were speaking, and she was talking about after World War II, it was all about the victory gardens. They needed more food, and we were encouraged to do that. And then she talked about, the chemical companies coming in. They had all this stuff going on. And it's like, what do we do with it? Well, hey, it'll kill dandelions, Yet they've been eating dandelions and being part of a diet for, forever. And the interesting thing I thought was interesting too is that these plants are all over the world because they travel all over through the air, and through colonialism, a lot of this stuff is the same in different parts of the world. So it's not just necessarily natural to certain geographical areas, which I thought was quite fascinating too.
I think that's another good point too. Like right now, we're getting all we need from other places. Like we're receiving things we could grow on our own backyard from China on a boat, and it's very, very, very accurate. And before, back in the day, we used to just get everything we needed where we were. Like there are things that we can use around us, go figure, that are good for us. So I think it's about getting back into that, like somehow using the systems we have now that work, but also getting back to the old kind of bartering and trading. I don't know. It's quite a complicated scenario. But
Absolutely.
No, just hold out that vision. I've seen remarkable things in the world change already by just holding out an impossible vision like that. And then
Well,
you're like, oh, actually, here's that happening. I had a friend come over the other day. He said our garden, we're having the best spring slash summer of all time in British Columbia here right now. And I had this kid that I'm friendly with. He said, "Hey, my mom's garden's overfilling. Do you want some greens?" So he brought over a bunch of greens, and isn't that how it should be? Oh, and I just heard a story of the house that I'm sitting in right now in Strathcona, East Vancouver. The lady that used to own the house next door was Mrs. Wong, I'm told, and she had this massive garden next door, and she would supply all of Chinatown with her greens out of her garden. Like she turned it into her enterprise. And then when Jillian and Richard, who own this house, they came in and they started growing flowers, and she's like, no, 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 you can't eat flowers, no growing flowers. So, funny.
And it used to be that the lawnmower was the goat or the sheep, that
Yeah.
along with the victory garden, so that might be another thing to come back. And Trevor, there are actually a lot of edible flowers too. So
Yeah.
We've got nasturtiums growing
yeah, flowers are the
because
sex
they're
organ
edible.
plants. It's very sexy to put flowers on your food. It attracts pollinators
Nice.
to your table.
And another thing I find interesting within, the plant-based diet and things of that nature, or anything that we put in our body is, it's the seasonal foods. We're not really meant to be eating bananas in the middle of winter if you're in the cold and winter. The sugar is meant to be able to manage the heat and things in the tropics. There's certain things that if we look locally, our genetic expression and the way we're supposed to, our body's generally designed to work is based on seasonal available foods within where you actually are, right? So I thought that was always an interesting thing when you start looking at seasonality and even locality. We've all heard of the 100-mile diet as well, right? So.
And it seems as a culture, we rely so much on eating annual plants that die with the first frost, that are very, that they're very prissy in a sense. They need mulch and fertilizer and everything. But when we eat these plants that could grow through the cracks in a sidewalk, that is going to help us to overcome adversity. And as you said, they're so satisfying on a cellular level that you don't even necessarily need a whole big meal. It's like, nibble a few wild berries here, a few green leaves. So hopefully, I'm so glad you're doing this, Casey, because it is something that we can take some responsibility to do with the little piece of land that we have the ability to care for. But nature's wild, and it's been this idea like we need to control nature. She's so wild. Oh, those flowers and leaves and everything. So a little bit of wild is maybe what we need. And another simple thing we can do is start composting and giving back to the earth rather than taking. Give back some water, give back some things that can make good soil, because I live right downtown in Boulder, Colorado, and we do compost, and we want to show people like it is possible. So simple things that we can take charge over.
I always think how cool it would be too if we educated kids in school, like if this was in the curriculum, and taught them about their emotions and like their imagination. And it's not just your imagination, like it is, but it's a beautiful thing that you create your reality with. It's not something that you need to blame things on. And like, I feel like we should be looking to kids for answers. They're open books. they're so interested in life. And if we could fuel that and get them more independent and stuff, that would be amazing.
I think we teach kids in ways we shouldn't be teaching them at all. One of my spiritual teachers, he had a daughter that he would travel all over the world with, and his one rule was don't teach her anything. Don't teach her all the stuff that has messed you up. If she's interested, she will ask you, but don't just all of a sudden force your teachings upon my child, please. And I think that's how, if we trust nature again, these little, these bundles of potential energy, if we just get out of the way, give it the safety to flourish and flower naturally, I think we'd have an entirely, less forcing information upon them, more cultivating, exactly what they ask for, I guess.
Yeah, and like instead of blaming things on them and whatnot, like I think it's when you're 4 to 6 years old you kind of develop your worldview and you accumulate all these things people tell you and you formulate how you see yourself and your beliefs. So what if we could teach kids then, like, hey, you're gonna go through some traumatic experiences. It's not the end of the world. You're not your emotions. You have them, but you're able to process them at any time and like to get rid of all these guilt and blame, and like we could have such amazing kids. And another thing I think about is like the education system. And what if everyone had an opportunity to go to school? How many kids are really poor, but they're so smart, but they never had the opportunity to exercise any of that? Like,
Yeah, and
people and getting rid of these barriers we have within generations and races, and it's just so stupid. We have to get over ourselves.
and in that, I'd love to see them, be taught life skills, things that every human being needs to know to help understand themselves, and to learn and grow, to give them problem solving skills and tools. In school, if you get help from your friends, it's cheating. And in the real world, if you don't get help from your friends, it may be a very difficult thing. Like if I need help with something, I know I can reach out to any three of you, and if you can help me, you will, right? But if I do that in school now, oh, that's not being resourceful, that's being cheating. And someone once told me a long time ago, it's like, you go to school and they're really teaching you to conform. So when the bell rings, it's recess. When it rings again, you got to come back. You have to be quiet in class. You can't, there's all sorts of things, so that they're setting you up back in the day for factory work and being an employee and everything else, so that you would be a conformist versus, a free thinker. And I know I've seen and experienced that in school too, where, you're just not really, they don't teach you some basic things. And, I know Trevor knows I'm part of the Tony Robbins world, and he teaches practical psychology. And I think everybody needs to learn that. If you take the most basic stuff he teaches, that should be a curriculum as soon as you enter high school, when you're at least old enough to understand basically what they're talking about. But they don't teach us any of these things in school, and then we have to go discover it ourselves after we've been conditioned and programmed from society, culture, religion, schools, different backgrounds of, where people are from and their families. And then you get into this Western world, and it's just this big, melting pot of different cultures, values, beliefs, and, and it's the land of the free. So it's just becomes a very interesting place we're in the world today.
When my kids were little, they would of course ask for money, and I'd say, we're going to go for a walk around the block. I'll give you $0.25 for every plant you can identify, 50 cents if you know the Latin name, and you get $1 if you can tell me 3 uses of the plant. And,
Oh my goodness.
and we would have to walk around a different block, every week. But I always felt, what if there was a hurricane or a tornado, or you were lost in the woods, or we need to be better prepared for adversity. And kids are so receptive because, fairy tales and stories are full of, magic potions and things that break the spell. So I think that really inspired me as a kid.
I feel radically underprepared now that I know your story better, Bridget. I think, to the education point, when I read books like Think and Grow Rich and The Science of Getting Rich, and we're
Yeah.
kind of in this anti-capitalist phase of mankind right now, where maybe you don't like the word rich, but maybe think and grow into whatever the heck you want out of life. The science of having abundance in your life, because they're really texts on manifestation, and I feel like those are spiritual texts. And I felt as soon as I read those, I'm like, holy smokes, I've been given the keys to the kingdom here. Like, what do I want to create? So I spent the next 20 years figuring out how I would make money without losing my soul in the process. And happily, there's an answer to that as well. You just, how do you take these principles on how to become exceptionally abundant and apply them to bettering the world at large, is how you save your soul through that process.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could just realize that by being stingy and trying to have all the things for ourselves, we're actually like cutting off any sort of connection to abundance at all. And if we could learn to respect nature and work with her, and first of all, stop fighting as a human race, like if we all did that, we could literally live in the Garden of Eden. We
Yeah.
already are. We just don't recognize it, and we're trashing it like we're 5 years old.
Exactly. That same spiritual teacher I referred to earlier, he said the worst thing that was ever done was creating this idea of a heaven and or hell that you went to in the afterlife. It's like that one single idea has been more destructive than any other, because there isn't, who cares about an afterlife if you can create heaven on earth right now?
Mhm. We're always giving away our power in the moment, like, oh, it's going to be this way soon. You're always almost there. Like, keep going. You're always almost there, but you're right where you are when you're there. And if you can use the power that you have now to visualize what you want instead of worrying about all the things you don't want, then it's going to work out for you.
Mhm.
Yeah, and an interesting word you use there is worry. And, it's something that's permeated our culture where I think it was Ed Bradley on 48 Hours one time, was talking to a tribe of, I think they're the Mokins in Burma back in the day. And because they were nomadic, they had very few belongings because they traveled following the food sources. And Ed Bradley asked him, he says, well, don't you ever worry that you won't find food? And they asked, and he said, worry, what does that mean? So I explained to him what worry meant, and he says, oh, we don't have a word for that in our language. We don't worry. We find the food or we die. There's no worry. We do or we don't. It's that simple. You don't fall in a hole and then worry you'll never get out. You get out or you die, right?
Yeah.
And I thought it really struck home, especially my passion for language and linguistics, where it just, imagine if there was all of a sudden certain words removed from our vocabulary, right?
Mm.
And we
Jesus
looked at,
said, make no thought for the morrow. If a crow's taken care of, and a flower's taken care of, you don't think God will take care of you in the same way?
mm-hmm. And when that happens, when you can actually let go of that, life changes instantly, because worry creates and invokes the law of attraction, if you believe in that principle. And whatever you focus on with that powerful emotion of worry or fear or scarcity, you will manifest and create that. And if you take that energy and you focus on what you do want and you work in that direction, you'll create that too. So it's about being really mindful of how we control our thoughts. And in my experience, when I changed to being vegetarian, eating as much, raw organic foods as I can, the way I think changed too. It was a very interesting transition where, my thoughts, actions, behaviors changed with that change in my eating and my dietary habits.
My entire spiritual path, consciously anyway, shifted because of worry. I broke up with a girl. I was living in Whistler at the time. She broke up with me. The one thing she said, ironically now, the only reason she could give me is that I wasn't spiritual enough. So then I drove to my uncle, who was a mentor to me. It was a 10-hour drive. I was miserable. I got there. We went for a beer together, and he's like, Trevor, you worry too much. I've got a book for you. When we got home, he gave me How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. And I read the first chapter of that book, and the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. And that was really the first book that ever taught me that books could teach you something, because high school did a horrible job in teaching me that books had anything of value in them. So I started reading every book I could get my hands on after that, and everything good has come from that.
Yeah. This is a question, Brigitte, I was curious about. What was the real reasoning behind the war on drugs, and what even are drugs?
Well, yeah, I recently read this book called something, a Scream, and
Chasing the Scream.
Chasing the Scream.
Johan Hari, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of reasons for the war on drugs, but according to what we know from history is that after prohibition was lifted, they needed another enemy. Otherwise, people who were looking for people making moonshine and having speakeasies, they needed a new enemy, and so cannabis became the enemy. We also have heard, I'm sure everyone's aware, that it was another way of racial profiling people, arresting people that maybe they didn't want on the streets. I know we've all heard stories that if you were wealthy and you got busted with a little bit of weed, no big deal. But if you were, living in the ghetto and you had it, you could be looking at long jail time. And there's people still in prison for that. I also think that, psychedelics, for example, increase people's awareness, make them question authority, maybe not, you kind of see through the illusion that we're being fed in the mainstream media. And that's a little bit threatening. And so, being a child of the 60s, I know that when people, took psychedelics in a sacred way, that very often they would say, why would I want to go fight in a war and kill people I don't know? We're not even defending our country. So it certainly changed consciousness and made people more difficult to control. So, we've made a lot of progress, and I'm glad for that. So we'll see how it unfolds, and we need to be active and do what we can to keep working. And, I really like to teach about how to use them in a safe and sacred way so that we don't have people making the headlines for, doing crazy, dangerous things. So I really think it's an important subject, and I know all of us here hold that really dear to making a positive difference. Like, this is a precious time, and let's make it evolve rather than go back to the way it used to be.
I like the second part of her question there. I'd love to hear your answer to it. What is a drug?
Well, the word drug actually is an old Scandinavian word that means a dried plant.
Dried plant, I heard that, yeah.
Dried plant. So, that's really the definition of it. And I think there's like so many definitions, just like, what is an herb, what is a spice? But, we have many definitions for drug. People go to the doctors to get drugs. They go to the drugstore to get drugs. But originally it was a dried plant. And one of the big differences between the pharmaceutical industry is around 1900, about 80% of all drugs were made from plants. We have birth control pills that came from wild yam. We have digitalis that came from the foxglove. Even aspirin was from meadowsweet and willow and aspen trees. But as Marc said, they would very often either look for the active ingredient, usually an alkaloid. Alkaloids usually end in IN or INE, like
ibogaine.
Yeah, nicotine, codeine, morphine, caffeine. And so when you remove an alkaloid from a whole plant, you very often are going to get side effects, because when you use the whole plant, you've got essential oils, you've got chlorophyll, you've got vitamins, you've got fiber. And, a great example is coca leaves are chewed in South America. They're high in protein, high in calcium. They're not considered addictive. But when you isolate the supposed crystalline white powder, now you've got an addictive drug. And so, I like using things that are natural as much as possible, because I love the idea that somewhere on the face of the earth we're supporting farmers and growers and helping to preserve the land, rather than another chemical company spewing waste into our water and air.
And we had, I did an interview years ago when I started this whole interview process. I was going on the path. A woman locally here, her name's Sherry Strong, and she teaches about sugar and how sugar lights up the brain and the opioid receptors more so than cocaine and heroin. And she would say, sugar is a drug. Anytime you take something green and make it white, it's a drug, right? As well as it becomes that perception, I think, what you were saying as well, Brigitte. I spoke to a reporter one time about our Spirit Plant Medicine conference, and she was talking about, she wanted to talk to somebody about ayahuasca. And she goes, well, these drugs. And I go, oh, no, they're not drugs. They're a medicine. And it was interrupting her pattern, because as soon as I got a CBC reporter want to talk about ayahuasca as a drug, my radar warnings went off, because that's not the publicity, that's not the message we want to be sending about these healing plants. And it's just so true that, and the plants, what you were saying as well, Brigitte, is everything, as Dennis McKenna would say, symbiosis, baby. The magic of the plant is all the plant, not just stripping one thing out of it.
Well, even our salt. So our two main flavors in our culture, sweet and salty, have both been turned into drugs, because most salt is heated to 1400 degrees, all the minerals removed, and then sold to the vitamin companies. So people crave, chips and salty snacks because the minerals are gone. They're looking for love in all the wrong places. So, I'm encouraging people, if you're going to buy sweets and salt, look for them in a more whole form: honey, molasses, raw sugar, salt, Himalayan or Celtic salt. And you'll find that a little bit is more satisfying. And rather than drugging yourself and lighting up your brain, you're nourishing yourself.
And one thing I'd like to add in is to really be aware of what these major corporate companies are doing, the McDonald's, the Hostess, all of these people in their corporate kitchens, they have a term, because they can't use addictive. They have a word that they use called craveability, and they balance the salt, sugar, and fats in a way that we crave them. Like that stupid McDonald's French fry as a kid, you love that thing because it had a balance of salt, sugar, and fat. Right? The Big Mac, whatever it is, whatever you're eating, and there's no nutritional value to these foods. They're dead as dead can be, So it's just, it's important what we put in our body, for sure.
And, heroin was invented by the Bayer Corporation in 1900 as a remedy, supposed remedy, for the soldier's disease, which was morphine addiction, which happened, during the Civil War. There was no, limitations on buying morphine, but what they found out was the more you refine a substance, the more addictive it is. So opium's addictive, but morphine's even more addictive, and then you refine it another step, and whoa, now you've really got problems.
I wonder where one draws the line between clinical practice and natural medicine, because it's really awesome that psilocybin is happening with the mainstream, but the synthetic psilocybin kind of unquestionable. I don't know anything about it. I'm not here to tell anyone what's good or bad, but would that be the same as taking the whole plant, So
I know that when psilocybin was first synthesized, it was brought to Maria Sabina, who was the original kind of curandero that was on the cover of Life magazine. And she didn't want to be, but that's when magic mushrooms were kind of introduced into the Western culture, and she was given the synthesized psilocybin. Apparently she said, yes, this is Los Niños. Like she did kind of feel the same thing. But then I wonder about kind of a more holistic, that entourage effect, right? Like rather than just having THC, you've got all the other the terpenes and things like that makes cannabis even more healthy. So there are some actual companies, Numinous and Salvation Botanicals. They have licenses from Health Canada and they just secured a license from Health Canada to produce psilocybin from the mushroom itself at a quality that will be able to be used in clinical trials. So it'll be neat once we can have a side-by-side study to see what was more beneficial in the end.
And I just don't understand. Just eat the mushroom.
Yeah,
Just eat
right.
the mushroom.
I know.
Why do
Yeah.
we have to go get crazy on science about it? It grows. It's a renewable resource. It's, you know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
but we got to go make it better and make money.
The white coats want to know specific, standardized. What can we do?
Yeah.
I see, like I say, middle road. I see the need for that, absolutely. At the same time, if mushrooms just grow out of a cow pie, nature has already legitimized them to that degree. Just go nuts,
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how can we communicate with these people who don't have any understanding on it? We can't just tell them, come on, like,
Have them eat some mushrooms.
Yeah, well,
that would be
slip
ideal.
it. My whole shtick, because I went through. I'm 44 years old right now, but let's say when I was 28 years old and I was just starting to figure out the matrix, as it were. I was born on the other side of the tracks, very tight-laced, suburbia, Kitchener, Ontario, and then I all of a sudden started learning these other things, and I went through the evangelical stage, like, oh my God, people, how could you not see? Like, this is the world's messed up, and this is it, and this is it, and you don't get very far with people being like that. So I learned early on that sometimes it's good to slip enlightenment through the back door. You could maybe be eating a little better than you are, or maybe you could think of it this way, and that's how we'll change the world.
Yeah, like through inspiration. I went through a big phase like that too, and until people have their own experience, like, what do they have to base?
I just want to do a time check. It's 8:52 now. I have a hard stop in 3 minutes because there's a conference in Israel that an Israeli group is hosting on psychedelics that I need to be on the line for immediately after this. So
Awesome. Yeah, I have quite a busy day, so I'll just wrap it up.
cool.
Yeah, I'll leave a bio for anyone who hasn't heard of any of these wonderful people in the link. So yeah, thank you all so much.
Yeah, that was really awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Bridget, for bringing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hope you all meet again. Peace.
Yeah. Hopefully these borders open up and you can come up and visit us again soon, Bridget.
I love that. And I know a few of us are Facebook friends.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Casey, for bringing us all together, and all the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Casey.
Thanks so much,
Awesome.
Casey. Nice I've never seen your face before, so nice to see your lovely face. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, we'll see ya.
All right, take care.